Hello, it's the 4th of July, Philippine date and time. It's a Saturday morning. To celebrate the 4th of July as our Independence Day. Now we have declared the Independence Day and make it our national holiday every 12th of June. This day for us is an annual national holiday observed on June 12th, commemorating the declaration of Philippine independence from Spain in 1890. That's a piece of very important history. Screaming in some headline today is the signing of the anti-terrorism bill into a law by President Rodrigo Duterte. I just want to read a few paragraphs of the headline news from the online pages of the Inquirer broadsheet, and it's from inquirer.net, the 4th of July. 2020 signs terror law amid wide opposition by Julie M. Aurelio, reporter. President Rodrigo Duterte signed the sweeping anti-terrorism law on Friday, ignoring loud and strong opposition from diverse groups and individuals, including former members of a Moro separatist movement who warned that it would violate civil and political rights and the Constitution itself. The signing of the aforesaid law demonstrates our serious commitment to stamp out terrorism, which has long plagued the country and has caused unimaginable grief and horror to many of our people, the spokesperson Harry Roque said. Roque said Mr. Duterte and his legal team took time to study this piece of legislation, weighing the concerns of different stakeholders. So as I read this news content and as the outside noise filters in, this is real life, how we're going to be affected by this law, the House bill becoming a law, which I heard will be contested in the Supreme Court. So we're talking about real life here. The law, and again I go back to the news article, the law which will repeal the Human Security Act of 2007 allows the detention of suspected terrorists for up to 24 days without charges. It also criminalizes incitement of terrorism through speeches, proclamations, writings, emblems, banners, or other representations. It gives an anti-terrorism council composed of cabinet members the authority to designate individuals or groups as suspected terrorists and order their surveillance and arrest without warrants. Convicted terrorists will be imprisoned for life without parole. Bangsamoro call. A day earlier, the Bangsamoro Transition Authority, or BTA, the interim parliament created following the peace agreement between the government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, or MILF, passed a resolution urging Mr. Duterte to veto the measure for fear that it might be used to discriminate against and abuse Muslims. The stories and experiences of the Bangsamoro people, particularly on their decades-long struggles for peace, provide evidence that counter-terrorism strategies with no or limited regard for human rights cannot win the ideological battle against terrorism, nor can it suppress violent extremism. Bangsamoro Interim Chief Minister Murad Ibrahim warned. Once again, incidents of violations of human rights will be authorized, and the Bangsamoro people, easily labeled as terrorists, would again be subject to discrimination and abuse. End of quote. Top military and security officials have repeatedly cited the threats from terrorist groups such as the Abu Sayyaf and those sympathetic to the Islamic State to back the law. Senate President Vicente Soto III, the primary author of the bill, said he was glad the president has sifted through the rubble and saw the importance of the law. The principal sponsor, Senator Panfilo Lacson, the principal sponsor of the measure and its chief defender, gave much credit to Mr. Duterte and his strong political will in signing the law. I cannot imagine this measure being signed under another administration. If only for this, I take my hat off to the president, he said in a Viber message. Lacson, a former national police chief, said he would exert extra effort in guarding against possible abuse in its implementation, despite the safeguards it already contains. Since the House of Representatives approved the anti-terrorism bill in May, Lawyers groups, human rights advocates, and other sectors had been expressing strong opposition to the measure, claiming it can be used to stifle dissent and violate human rights. Albay Representative Edsel Lagman, one of the most vocal opponents of the measure, said the safeguards in the less repressive Human Security Act were all obliterated by the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020 and replaced with motherhood declarations, which are orphaned by oppressive provisions. Bayan Muna Representative Carla Zarate wasn't surprised that Mr. Duterte had signed the law. This is indeed a horrific day for the country as another darker era for human rights looms, the Makabayan leader said. Point of interest, as I cannot participate in two-way dialogues about the merits or bad omens of some provisions becoming a full-fledged law of the land, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, I am very interested in what's going to happen now and in the next months. The proponents and the opponents of this law will have a face-off in different venues, greatest of which is in the Supreme Court. Once again, it has earned its moniker, the final arbiter, when it comes to disputes and conflicts. With the freedom of expression as itemized in the provisions of this law said to be outlawed, there is a brewing of a perfect storm in the horizon. So what will happen now and in the months to come? Well, for me, we must not lose sight of the fact that there will always be a freedom wall where the expressions will always be allowed, but it will be tendered with responsibility and culpability. They will not be lost. They should not be lost. Why do I say this? It is a fact that technology has already created some kind of revolution in our way of life, and that its effects are as undeniable as day and night. With a purchase of a 10 peso data, whatever ID you have, real or fictitious, an email can be applied for, and presto, you have your own address, and in connection to that, you're already plugged into the ecosystem, and your freedom wall can contain all your personal expressions. But the question remains, whose personal expression? Did you give your identity, or can you be held responsible if it affects another person negatively or fatally? In times past, those who had it are called privileges of the middle class because we could afford the prohibitive subscription price to a connection to local internet provider. In my case, it was Moscom.com. Never mind the 1% of the population, they own the facilities through stocks and shares anyway. But for the rest of us, some could afford it, but some could not. What happened was that my friends and I, fortunately, we could talk about it and discuss about the information found through those subscriptions amongst ourselves to the exclusion of others who could not afford them. So along with prohibitive internet subscription was the prohibitive subscription to telecommunication service, telephones, landlines, PLDT. Otherwise, a subscription to an internet provider was useless. On top of that, there was a prohibitive priced subscription to a cellular phone so we can have communication while mobile. Those gadgets were beyond the means of ordinary people back then. Now, those boundaries have been breached in such a way that information is quite freely flowing now, and that two-way communication is also mass communication. They've been digitalized to reach the hinterlands. With the technology available at an affordable cost, even a badly serviced area stands better than those without cause and means to complain because it was totally an alien technology to them. Some barriers to freedom have already been eclipsed. I want to correct myself. Most barriers to freedom have already been eclipsed by the technology like social media, empowering social media. The law is playing catch up.
We met up with co-founders Anthony Tan and Hui Ling Tan in Seattle, Washington, where they've set up a new office to grab some of America's top tech talent.
Joining me today on Bloomberg Studio 1.0, Anthony Tan and Hui Ling Tan, co-founders of Grab. Let's start at the beginning. You met at Harvard Business School. How did you two find each other?
Actually, it's really interesting. The first year we were in business school, we were in different classes. So the only times we met were when we were looking for Asian food. It was actually only in the second year that we started to really get to know each other, because we both serendipitously ended up taking the same class called Business at the Base of the Pyramid. Over that semester, I discovered that this guy is the hardest working guy ever. I was so glad he sat next to me because I was constantly taking his notes for class.
Yeah, she didn't do homework. I did the homework, and she copied my homework.
Are you okay with him saying that?
Completely fine. It's the truth. Everybody knows it.
You're from a big auto family in Malaysia. Did you know who he was?
I knew of his family. I didn't know of him personally. And to be honest, when I first discovered that he was the son of Tan Chong Motors, I wasn't particularly keen on getting to know him too much better because I had a bad conception around, rich families, their kids. They're not particularly hardworking, not necessarily always the nicest people.
And are you okay with her saying that?
Yeah, I mean, she's not too far from the truth. At one point, I would imagine a long time ago, I've been in those moments where I haven't been the most empathetical person, and I think over time, learning how to, have where I had to pay some of my own school fees, I had to go through work, do my own things. I worked in a factory, worked on the ground, assembling cars, going in a bus at 4:30 in the morning with our own teammates, assembling cars. I think those experiences humbled me and taught me a lot in life's lessons. And then by the time I got to HBS, thank God, that was when I was also a more grown up.
Your grandfather was the founder of Tan
Yes.
Chong Motors, which is
Yes.
a car company
That's
in
right.
Malaysia. Your father is the CEO.
That's right.
And you were working in marketing.
That's right. So first it was actually supply chain. So
Okay.
I ran supply chain. So from parts assembly, making sure all the parts were coming from all across the world, making sure it gets assembled nicely with a high quality standard.
How about you, Ling?
Grew up in a very typical middle-class family. My dad was a civil engineer, my mom a stockbroker at Remaisia. And to be honest, it was what you'd expect any other family to go through. Public schooling in Malaysia. I learned everything in Bahasa. So I only really picked up English very well when I went to undergrad in England.
So tell me how you get to HBS, you meet each other. How is Grab born?
Over conversation. So going back to the class that we sat next to each other at, it was a collection of cases of how to build sustainable businesses that have double and triple bottom lines. Whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in CPG, we learned so much. It's because of those great cases that sparked our mutual interests. Automotive industry, my terrible experiences taking taxis in a very unsafe environment in Malaysia, that we realized that the smartphone mobile revolution that was happening could actually potentially unlock a problem that many had tried to solve before, but had not successfully done so.
This was a couple of years after Uber had launched. How much was Uber sort of a blueprint?
It was very different. It was black cars. It was everyone can have its private driver. Ours was just, hey, how do we make sure that women like Ling have the best safe alternative out there in a very affordable way?
So if you were to Google world's worst taxis 7 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the top hit for the first page or two would have been Kuala Lumpur, which is Malaysia's city capital. That's the environment we grew up in.